What does Section 49 says? It says that a presiding officer at a polling unit, once a voter comes before him, if he's satisfied, that's language, if he's satisfied that is the person, he issues him ballot paper to vote. That's what led to massive rigging. Remember, we're doing manual register. They just write with the biro and all that. Section 53, with respect to determining, overvoting. It was based on total number of registered voters. That was used to rig elections. Then, of course, you have Section 68 of the Act, which says that all these categories of persons that are shown on that pyramid, that the decision of a returning officer shall be final, only subject to the court. So from day one, all the politician needed to do was to go and buy returning officer. You remember in 2019, returning officers were hiding from one place to the other. They will appear, disappear, and so on and so forth. That's what they were doing, because they knew that INEC had no longer control anymore. It must go to the court. Ladies and gentlemen, it took us 20 years to persuade the National Assembly to remove these provisions. And that happened in 2022. Remember that before the 2022 Act was reluctantly signed, it will be rejected 4 times. Do you all remember that? It was rejected. And it was eventually signed. So you now have Section 47, which is a new one, again from 49. We now have Section 51, and we now have Section 65, which says that where the return has been made out of due process, administratively, INEC as a regulator of elections in Nigeria had the power administratively to review it without having to go to court. That is Section 65 we now have. All of these things were done to give meaning and purpose to the ballot as the best means of the expression of the will of the people in democracy. The basic issue that had to do with credible election had to do with these processes that I've outlined. And that's why I spent little time to explain to Nigerians that, look, recall, we came in to deal with that Section 49. We have to do separate voting, separate time for accreditation, and separate time for voting. You all remember what happened in 2011. Then from there, we migrated to the smart card reader in 2015. And in 2015, to tell you that as INEC is planning, politicians are also planning, trying to look at the process, how to going to bypass the process. In 2015, we now said, look, we need to identify people having successfully, because Jega leadership was the first who successful, no, we didn't start it, but the very first successful compilation of biometric register was done under the Jega leadership. And we are part of that effort. Now, it was now decided that we need to confirm your fingerprint. That was the idea of Carida. Carida was now introduced. For the purpose of inclusivity, ladies and gentlemen, we knew that there were some Nigerians who have issues with their fingers. We now decided to have an application in the Carida to take into account those who don't have fingers. Ladies and gentlemen, the presiding officer we trained, they went to various communities. Suddenly, the whole community no longer have fingers. They were now using that application. The whole community, no fingers anymore. These were the things that he did to undermine the credibility of the electoral process in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, the current amendment to the Electoral Act, where they have now basically dealt with so many provisions, is a tragedy to our country. It's a big tragedy. It's a regression from the threshold that we have crossed, and I will point them out here. And that's why I feel sad for our country. That every election year we are discussing the same issue. We forgot that election is just a process. The ultimate goal is development. But we seem to be stuck in the issue of elections. That appears to be where we are at the moment. And so when you have a proviso, which of course was brought about regrettably by my constituency. I made the point. If Nigeria will die, it will die because of we lawyers. It will die because of we lawyers. Both the bar and the bench. Both the bar and the bench. Because Section 160 in 2010 when we came on board subjected INEC to the control of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We wrote a memo to Mr. President Goodluck Jonathan, whose victory for due process and democracy was very clear. It was Jonathan that, look, We need enough federal freedom for our democracy to survive. Jonathan initiated the process for the first alteration of Section 160. We stated clearly that of all the executive bodies established under Section 153, with respect to the Independent National Electoral Commission, its powers to make regulation and determine its own procedure shall not be subject to the direction or control of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That was what Jonathan did and gave us freedom. Secondly, 48 hours to the election, Section 52, subsection 2 of the 2010 Act that expressly prohibited the use of electronic system in our elections. In order to give room for the use of the corridor, President Jonathan assented to it 48 hours before that election. Those were the things that we put in place as safeguards to make our democracy work. It's a student that have paid exam that should be repeating exams. I'll be asked to repeat the exam now by discussing these things that we have discussed before because they are there. Look at what happened to Section 77 of the current Act. You cannot spend precious legislative time in going to an area that will be covered by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria where you have zero competence. Who can contest election? Under Section 65 of the Constitution, qualification, Section 131 with respect to the President, Section 177 with respect to the Governor. All the subsections, C, were clear of the Constitution to the effect that you must belong to a political party and be sponsored by that political party. So the amendment to say that you should go out to determine the time within which you can be a member is unconstitutional. If people got Section 40, go and look at it. It's very clear. You freedom of association, you can belong to any political party. You cannot regulate the political party in a manner that will regulate them out of existence. After all, look at Democratic Party here in America. Democratic Party was formed in 1828. It is today 198 years as a political party. Republican was formed in 1854. It's today 172 years. We must recognize that political parties are the essential organs of the democratic process. They are indeed, without these parties, in fact, modern representative democracy is inconceivable. So, the role of law enforcement agencies. The Constitution is very clear and good enough. Some of the provision of the Act have also said clearly the role of security agencies. We have just entered the season of intolerance at the moment. Once we enter election period, it's a season of intolerance, where there's total disregard for the rule of law, the right of opponent, as we have seen over time. I recall in 2015 in Benin, where I served my last time in office, where a powerful politician declared in Edo State that they were going to use the federal might in Edo State. And I addressed a press conference. I called our chairman. In fact, he called. Have you read what Sister Person said? I said, yes. I read the press conference, and I was clear to them that, look, under our watch, under my watch in Edo State, it is the will of the people through the ballot that will determine who becomes what, and not the federal might. That it is the might of the people through the ballot that will speak loud and clear. And so we have entered a state of intolerance at the moment. Security agencies, you have a role. That's why I talk about the trinity of INEC, judiciary, and security. Your job is to create an enabling environment that will enable Nigerians to go out to vote on election day, to allow for two important crucial factors, which are authorization, that the people who are going to office are authorized to go there. It is when there's an authorization that there's a basis for accountability. Where there's no authorization, there will be no accountability. And so it is your duty to do so. Interestingly enough, the 2022 Electoral Act, as well as the 2026 Section 95, Section 97, Section 99, all of these sections are very clear that no political party or candidate shall be prevented from holding rallies. None should be prevented from holding rallies. And specifically enjoin commissioners of police. Commissioners of police, you cannot be talking about public order, write a letter for permission. No. Public institutions like civic centers, stadia, television, all of those property belong to the Nigerian people. Whether you are at the state level, at the federal level, they belong to Nigerians. And the law says that they must all be given access to use them. And in any case, with respect to the issue about venue, the principle of first come, first serve. And that what the police require to do, according to the law, is to provide adequate security, one. Number two, in a consultative manner, and not to prevent people from holding elections. And so, I must say this, finally, that credible election is what gives life to the sustenance of democracy. Democracy is what also gives hope for the people. And it must be borne in mind that democracy cannot thrive in the soil of absolutism. Democracy can only survive where the rule of law flourishes. Because it is rule of law that gives viability to the practice of democracy. Without the rule of law, society and democratic practice will be nothing but the coming together of the most set of people, the most vicious, whose whims and capitals will prevail. This must not be allowed to happen in our country. We must not surrender, compromise the value of integrity. This is very key because today, outside the country, most of our people are not respected because of the fact of the way they feel that elections are conducted. Democracy is like an orchestra. The sound do not blend, it do not melt. It's a symphony, it's not a concerto. The sound of democracy, like an orchestra, its melody depends on the unique sound that different instruments bring to the entire melodious whole. All of us who have a role to play, we must stand tall, and particularly my constituency, because in the final analysis, the best elections, or the best laws or best processes around the world will not give you election if we don't have men and women of integrity who will call justice by its own name to do the right thing for our country. The winner of election must be determined finally and conclusively at the court. And so the sound of democracy is a sound that will never stop at playing, because the broad outline of the 21st century is clear. It offers opportunity for people who can live together, who can work together, and give not only to themselves, but for future generations, whose faces we are yet to see, whose name we may never know, all of whom should be able to say that indeed we left behind a heritage of a credible democratic framework for our country.